some common AP automation pitfalls and what you can do to avoid. When we talk about automation and we talk about automation and the accounts payable function, we've come a long way in, if to be honest, not a very long period of time, although probably to many of you it seems like this is going at the speed of light, not quite that fast. If you entered the workforce in the early 80s, or earlier, obviously, your accounts payable function was on a mainframe, and if you were at the very, like in the 70s, you might even have been using data cards for entry. You know, the big thing with those boxes and boxes of cards was don't drop them, because then they got out of nightmare. We moved on, I would say, in the 80s and into the early 90s into having desktops. And first of all, there were just a few of us who had desktops, and then it became more commonplace. And of course, today, everybody has a desktop, and if they don't have a desktop, they have a laptop. You couldn't imagine working in accounts payable without a computer, but you know what? There was a time when folks did, and it was not that long ago. Then the big innovation, the internet, followed rather closely by email, and before long, we all had email addresses and were communicating that way instead of using the phone and or the postal mail. Now, of course, email gives with one hand and takes with another. I'm sure many of you who are listening to this today would sometimes like to take your email box and throw it out the window if could. And then actually it was about the year 2000 when we started to talk about invoice automation. Those first solutions tended to be company specific. They were extremely expensive to create, and there were a lot of problems with it was not uncommon to hear price tags of several $1 million, which of course meant it was all the purview of large companies. And then, the big innovation, cloud, and now we have AI and RPA, and the conversation about automation and accounts payable is not if it will take place, but how fast it will take place and how much AI will be used. And of course, in the back of everybody's mind is the question is this going to eliminate the accounts payable function? And I'm going to tell you my answer to that is I don't believe so, at least not in our lifetime. We're still trying to get to the point where we make these automation solutions work in a way that makes our lives easier, not harder. Now, because automation is with us and it's here to stay, I think we're going to get to the point where when we talk about invoice processing, it will automatically be assumed you have some sort of an automation solution. I mean, just like today, if I were to ask you to do even the most basic analysis, you'd probably immediately pull up an Excel spreadsheet. I think we're going to get to that soon. But there's a lot of mistakes that people are making when it comes to automation, and I broke them down into rough areas. You may or may not agree where I put them. It's just a way to break the information down. But we're going to talk about planning, analysis. We're going to talk about our vendors. And by vendors, I mean our suppliers, not the third-party service providers who are creating these solutions for us, implementation and process. So let's dive right in and get started. And we're going to start about the planning stage. Now, one of the first mistakes that people make, or some people, obviously, not everybody makes the same mistake, is that sometimes management has unrealistic expectations. They heard a talk, they went to a conference or they went to a luncheon or they were talking with one of their colleagues and somebody mentioned invoice automation, and before you know it, they come back and they think this is going to eliminate all the transactional work from accounts payable. And as those of you who are involved with it have learned the hard way, yeah, it'll eliminate some of it, but it does not eliminate all of it, okay? And so what you want to do is when you hear those conversations, as much as you can, you want to nip them in the bud. You want to make sure that when your organization goes forward with an automation project, that everybody has realistic expectations, okay? So you want to make sure that when they're approving a proposal, they know what's going to be delivered and they don't, think that, okay, we're going to go forward. The solution's going to go live today, and by the end of the week, all our invoices will be flowing through it, and all our suppliers will be sending them that way, because it doesn't happen that way. Now, when you decide to go forward, you want to make sure that you do a thorough research of the market. I believe that there are about 50 solution providers. I had one of my colleagues tell me he thinks there are 300. The number is somewhere in between there. The point is there are a lot of them. So you've got to do some research. Some of them are used in one industry and primarily, and so you want to talk to some of your peers. And so you want to make sure that you do your research. And there are many places that you can do your research. Obviously, you want to talk to your peers. If you find out that one of your competitors is using a particular solution, you might take a close look at that, because if it works for them, maybe it'll probably work for you too, because you probably have the same types of invoices. You can go to the service provider's website, see if they're offering any webinars, look at their website. Sometimes they'll have product demos on there. Sometimes you have to sign up for them, and that's fine, but maybe you don't want to. And then in that case, look and see if the vendor in question has a YouTube web page, and maybe they have the demos on YouTube. We're seeing a larger and larger number of folks do that, and that gives you the ability to watch it without committing, without giving them your name and contact information, and then having them constantly follow up with you. Now, when you are going through this process, you also want to make sure that you include your processes, the people who handle the invoices day in and day out. Because you know what? They know what the problems are. They know what's important, what's not important. They know where the glitches are, and they have a lot of useful information to contribute to this conversation before you make the purchase, because they deal with it day in and day out. And in many cases, they're going to know process better than the manager or the controller does, because they deal with it day in and day out. So you want to get input from them. And even if they didn't have anything to contribute, there's another very important reason you want to get them involved. And that is so that they feel that they're part of the process. They feel you value their input, and you might get something really good from them that you hadn't thought of on your own. And then if they feel that they're part of it, they are less likely to, dig their heels in and try and find ways to make it not work. Okay. So, it takes a village, and we want to include everybody. Now, when we're talking about bringing everybody into the picture, it's not only everybody in accounts payable, it's all impacted parties. So this might include purchasing, it might include treasury, it will include other areas of accounting, because we've all got our own issues, things that are important to us. And sometimes, accounts payable, we see processing the invoice, getting the payment out, and we're looking at it from our perspective. We're not looking at it from the accounting's perspective of getting the GL coding done right. We may not be looking at it from Treasury's perspective about worrying about cash flow. We're not looking at it does purchasing need some special information. So you want to make sure that you bring all impacted parties together, get the impact, and just like with your processes, then they are more apt to be on board and speak positively when you're trying to roll this out. If you ignore them and you ignore one of their issues, you can expect to hear about it. You expect to hear about it often and loudly, and it will not be good for the overall success of the project and for future projects that you want to bring on board. So you need to have everybody's perspective on it. Now, you also, if you can, once you're narrowing down your choice of which particular service providers you're going to use, you want to, as much as possible, get feedback from other users. Now, if you ask the service provider for recommendation from other people who are using the service, they'll give them to you. But but they're not going to give you the client who had a lot of problems, who complained a lot. They're not going to tell you who they are. They're going to give you somebody whose installation went pretty smoothly and is going to speak well of the product. And fair's fair. We all do the same thing. Like if we have to give references for a new job, you don't give the boss who didn't like you. You give somebody who's going to speak well of you. So I guess we can't blame them too much. But you can dig around and do a little research and get feedback from other users. You can look on LinkedIn discussion groups. If you belong to any industry groups, your company may belong to industry groups. You can see who's the contact there and see if they can find out what some of your competitors are using, what people in the same industry are using, and get their feedback. See who they used, and if they used one of the services that you're considering using, see if they had a positive experience, and see what problems they had. Because sometimes just by knowing what the problems are, you're ahead of the game. If you know that invoices with a dash in it, let's say, are apt to go through with the dash being picked up as a 7. I'm making that up. Nobody ever told me that was a problem. But if you know that, then you can plan around it, okay? So just knowing this information puts you ahead of the game. Now, you want to have an implementation plan. As much as we would like to have all our existing vendors automatically start using the new solution, there's pushback, or they don't like to change what they're doing. This is what it all boils down to. They want to keep doing things the way they're doing. They definitely don't want to do your training, okay, because it's you and their 6,000 other customers, and they don't want to do it for everybody. So you need to think about how you're going to handle them. You need to think about how you're going to transition your existing suppliers, and that could be a big challenge. And then you also need to think about what happens when there's an upgrade. And there's always upgrades. I'm sure you feel the way I do about Word and Excel and all that. I wish they'd stop changing things. It's like just when I learn how to do everything that I need to know, they change something and then I can't find the key, or I can't, I don't know where to click or whatever. Well, the same thing with your automation solution. So you need to think about what kind of training are you going to do. All right, let's talk about some analysis things. When you've narrowed down your selection, and let's say you have product A and product B, you want to make sure they're the same. Don't assume they are. You want to actually look through the functionality and see what they do. Even if they both have a same name or similar name, you actually need to look through the nuts and bolts and make sure that one of them isn't missing something that's very important to your organization. So it may or may not be. So for example, simple example, let's say you're comparing product A with product B, and product B doesn't do VAT. Well, if you are doing business in Europe, that can be a huge issue. But if you're not, it may not matter at all. So you need to do this in-depth analysis, taking into account what's important to your organization. Now, once you find a solution, don't customize it, okay? We're seeing less and less of that, to be honest, but we still see a few companies who fall into the trap of like, we're different, our business is, nobody's business is like ours, we're special, and then they customize it to handle whatever it is that they need. Now, the problem with customization is severalfold. Obviously, it increases the implementation time and your costs, and it can increase them exponentially. But more to the point, when there is an update either of your ERP system or of the solution that you bought, the two may stop working together, and you're going to have to get somebody in to help you adjust for that update. And those updates are coming, okay? There's nothing you can do about it. So if you need some customization, try and find a way to get whatever that is that you need done outside of the automation solution. If it's a report, see if you can just get it out of Excel or get it out of some analysis tool that you may be using. But do your best not to customize, because even if you say, okay, we're willing to bite the bullet and we're willing to pay whatever your consultant says it's going to cost, you're buying yourself lifelong problems. Okay, now when you go out to purchase a solution, it's really tempting to make cost a factor. Now, it should be a factor, not the factor. At the end of the day, the champagne product is always going to have more functionality and be able to do a whole lot more than the beer one. And you may have been given a budget that just doesn't allow you to have all those nice bells and whistles that are in the champagne product. But you need to keep in mind that just buying the least expensive product on the market may not solve all your problems, may not have some of the functionality that you need, and may cause you problem in the long run. You may then end up having to make a change. So you need to really seriously weed out, your must-haves from your nice-to-haves, keeping budget in mind. Now, the price on these products has come down tremendously. So in theory, to get that additional functionality that you want, it should not cost you a whole lot of money. So yeah, cost is an issue, but you really want to focus on some of the other stuff unless you get to the point where you won't be able to get the project approved because of the cost. Now, the silver bullet when it comes to getting high utilization for the automation solution has been to get a solution that can read invoices from email. And that's still a recommended approach, because that way your vendors don't have to change what they're doing, which is always a problem to get them to change anything. And then the automation solution goes into the email, it picks up the invoices and it reads them. That's great, but it is not going to completely eliminate your problems and your headaches, because the success rate at which those the invoices are read from the emails is not 100%. So you want to, when you're talking to your service providers about what they can provide, you want to ask them, what is the accuracy rate when reading data from an invoice that came in through email? I've heard in extreme cases, and let me emphasize this is an extreme case, a rate of 40%, which is horrific. You're looking for 100%. 40% is nowhere close to it. So you want to just get an idea of what that is, because again, this solution, despite what the salesperson may have told your CFO at some conference, it's not the silver bullet to eliminating AP. So when you go in, you want to think about it. You should not expect 100% accuracy, but 40% is not acceptable either. These solutions are getting better and better at reading invoices and reading data, reading data accurately, but we are not at 100%. So keep that in mind the next time you hear somebody saying, we'll be able to get rid of all our processes. Well, only if the CFO wants to sit and do the coding himself or herself, which I don't think is the case in most cases. It's getting better, but we're not at 100%. Okay, just want to talk a little bit about your vendors. You want to, when you're deciding on a solution that you're going to buy, you want to make sure that you think about the issues that your suppliers had. So for example, many suppliers don't want to change their processes. They especially don't want to change their processes for one of their customers. And then they have to do one thing for customer A, something different for customer B, and something different for customer D. You better be one of their huge customers before they're going to do that. And so, but what we see is when companies go out to buy an automation solution, they frequently, when they get the automation solution, they don't take into consideration the vendor. They think all about, what's good for the accounts payable function, what's good for their department. And by not thinking about what your suppliers need, you're increasing your chances that the solution will fail. So I did a podcast on it. I have a link to it. If you want to listen to it, it goes into all the vendor issues in a little bit more detail, and we're trying to keep to an hour, so I'm not going to go into them all, but you need to keep your supplier in mind. Now, the big place where the automation solutions fell down on the job, if you will, and I have to admit, I thought this was a great idea, and this was with the self-service feature in the automation solutions, where the suppliers suppliers would set themselves up basically in the master vendor file, and then you didn't have to set them up in the master vendor file. So you'd send them a link and they would set themselves up, and then anytime there was a change, they would go in and they would make the change. This was really, very, very helpful when it came to making sure the company did not fall for that change of bank account frauds, those emails that come through. But while AP loves them, the suppliers were all up in arms. And I was at a conference one time, at a credit conference, and I had a woman literally scream at me. I have 6,000 customers. Do you expect me to go into each of those portals and change the information every time we have a change? And let's think about it. Let's just say they did have a change of bank account, which, if you're in the business world, it happens from time to time. It happens in our personal lives. And they would have to go in and change 6,000 portals. So they were not happy about it. I've heard from credit professionals that they were up in arms. Some of them refused to use it. I know in a few cases, companies in their credit departments literally had to hire a new person just to deal with getting the information into these portals that their customers would use. And you know what? If we're going to be fair, which pains me, I can't say that I really blame them. So as much as we like this self-service feature for many, many reasons, I cannot see it lasting. And so this may be something that ends up going by the wayside. So this is another example or the best example that I can come up with of keeping your suppliers' needs also in mind. Anytime you ask them to do anything differently, you're going to drop your utilization rate. It's going to take you longer to get something up and running. And this was probably, asking them to do the most. The same thing goes with asking them to deliver invoices instead of just emailing them someplace, because again, then they're going to have to do something different for each one of their customers. And, they're not going to be happy about it. And you know what? I don't 100% blame them, although I would like to, okay? So don't forget to keep your suppliers' needs in mind. Now, not only do you need to, when you decide to go forward with an automation solution, do you need to, purchase the automation solution, but there also needs to be an implementation. This is definitely not one of those things. If we build it, they will come, because they won't. Okay. Even if you send out an email, a letter, and you think you've explained everything perfectly, and you're not asking them to do too much work, etc. Still, their letter's going to get lost in the mail. Somebody's going to forget to do it. It's going to go on someone's to-do list, and that to-do list has 40 items, and you're number 41. You don't expect high utilization right off the bat. You're going to have somebody work on it, work with your suppliers, explain what has to be done. Even if you give them instructions and you think those instructions are simple, a second grader could read it. Somebody is not going to get it. Somebody's not going to understand. You can expect pushback. So you'll have to work on it for a while, work with your suppliers. Now, you also need to decide what you're going to do with those who don't participate. If you have your email scenario where they can email the invoices, probably that will not be a huge deal, because you probably can get, I want to say all your suppliers to email invoices, but you may have one or two, but it'll be less of an issue. But have a plan. Don't just think, okay, hey, we're here, we're ready, and then nobody. So you also need to think about, and you probably want to do this before somebody's furious and their hair is standing up. You want to have a discussion as part of your implementation plan. What are you going to do with vendors who say they're not going to participate? What are you going to do? You just need to make a plan. Now, some people you'll be at two ends of the spectrum. They'll either say, okay, we'll be happy if we get 95% of our folks submitting invoices electronically, and then the rest you make a plan. They mail in the paper and you have somebody scan it and submit them. Or you have companies at the other end of the spectrum who say, okay, you know what? You don't send your invoices through this portal by whatever the date is. We're not going to pay you. Okay. Now you need to be careful with that for two reasons. First of all, the last thing that you want to do is not pay a critical supplier, critical vendor, who then puts you on credit hold. Now, you might think, well, all our large suppliers will pay, and they will. And then, the few small ones, well, if we lose them as suppliers, we don't care because, they only supply a tiny bit. But that tiny bit may be the thing that you need. You may only need a drop of whatever it is in your product, so you don't spend that much money on it. But without that little drop of whatever, you don't have a product. So just careful on that front. The other issues that you want to be careful about is, are you also their customers, and they'll treat you the way you treat them, and that cannot be good. And then my favorite, and you may or may not know who these people are you doing business with someone, for example, who is the brother-in-law of somebody who's on your board of directors, and then they go to the board of directors and they claim, and that's never a good situation. So if you do decide not to pay, careful, make sure you think it out, make sure you have contingency plans for everything. I think the best bet, I would say, is to figure you're not going to get 100% participation, and keep trying, and then have a plan to how you're going to handle those who you can't get to participate. And it can simply be as simple as having somebody in the mailroom scan those invoices in when they come in through the mail. It doesn't have to be an elaborate plan, but you should have a plan. Now, as I've already alluded to, when you go forward with your automation plan, there will not be instantaneous adoption. Some of them won't get your letter, some of them won't get your email. People leave, even if you'll get somebody to start participating, that person leaves, somebody new comes in and they decide they don't like it. So you're going to need to have some gentle arm twisting and explaining. If you have people who are good on the phone, who are good explaining things, don't get impatient with folks who, I don't want to say are stupid, but sometimes can be obstinate and unpleasant. You might want to see if they would be willing to take on the task, but make sure you have staff allocated for the implementation, because if you expect instantaneous adoption, you'll be in for a rude awakening. And this goes back, by the way, to what we talked about at the beginning about managers having unrealistic expectations, because and you want to start addressing it from there. At that point, you want to make sure they understand it won't happen overnight. Your implementation plan should allow for some human resources to work on converting your suppliers. Now, the nice thing about anytime you put in a new technology is that this is an opportunity to tweak your processes. If you have some steps that you're taking that are not optimum, that they're not best practice, and you've been wanting to change them, this is a good time to do it, because garbage in, garbage out, and if you've got weak trolls, they could be amplified by technology. So maybe right before you start implementing the technology, you want to go through your processes, see is there anything that we want to get rid of. Maybe we're doing some things that really don't make sense. We're producing reports that nobody looks at, taking, whatever it is. You want to get rid of them. You want to also take a look at your controls and see if you need to tighten them up. Now, sometimes when we tighten controls, it doesn't mean that we get the process done quicker. It might even take a little longer time. Think about all the verifications we have to do now for those change of bank account emails. That doesn't make the process go quicker, but it's really important, because you don't want to send somebody money who's not tied to it. So this is kind of a golden opportunity, if you will. You're making changes anyway, so let's take a look at our practices, our policies, our procedures, and this might be the time to make some changes. Maybe you've been wanting to do it for a while, and so you can slide them in part of this whole new update. Now, staff training. You don't want your project fail because you have not trained staff adequately. correctly. Now, when you have somebody on staff who does not know how to do something or doesn't know how to use the new technology, what you hope is that they'll come and ask. They'll say, I don't know how to do whatever, and you'll be able to train them. But that does not always happen. People don't want to look stupid. If you've given training to the whole staff and it looks like everybody's got it, the one person who's sitting there who doesn't understand what they're supposed to do, there's a decent chance that they won't raise their hand and say, hey, could you go over that again? So now they don't know how to do something, and whatever part of it is, and they're going to do one of two things, neither of which, by the way, is good. They're either going to take a guess at it and do it the way they think it should be done, which is often incorrectly, and then that creates errors, make your project less successful, or they start making excuses as to why they shouldn't use it or why this invoice can't be put through. They start talking, when they talk to suppliers, they tell them, oh, you don't have to use that new process, etc. So there's all sorts of things that they can do. None of them are good. Now, there is a chance that when they take a guess, they'll guess right, but I would say the odds are not in your favor on any of this. So before the projects go live, you want to make sure, A, that you have training and that you have plenty of it. Better to overtrain than to undertrain. And then you want to try and create an environment where if somebody doesn't know how to do something, they feel comfortable coming forward and asking a question or two. It's really hard to get people to do that, but it's really important, because when somebody takes a guess and the guess is wrong, that creates additional work. Okay, let's now turn our attention, and we are going to talk a little bit about process. So when you're planning your process, you want to think about the future. There's the short-term future and the long-term future. The short-term future is just getting the system up and running, and then the long-term future is, what are we looking at? Now, I don't want you to think that I don't realize cost is a consideration. It is always a consideration, hopefully within reason. I'm not going to just go pick the cheapest solution, but I understand that, but I'm going to put it aside for now. Now, when we look at the automation solutions that are on the market today, there are many of them, and we see them when we're talking about accounts payable. They seem to fall into two categories, and I'm being broad here, but this is why I'm telling you have to read the scripts, and we'll hear it referred to as AP automation or invoice automation. In my mind, but that does not mean it's the mind of all the service providers. When we talk about invoice automation, we're talking about automating just the invoice process. When we're talking about AP automation, we're talking about automating the whole accounts payable process. So processing the invoice and scheduling it for payment and making the payment. And we could even take it one step further, and we could talk about P2P automation, which would also then include issuing the purchase order, which gets sent over also to AP. So even if you think you know what they're talking about, are they talking about invoice automation? Are they talking about accounts payable automation? Make sure you read those descriptions as to what is included in each particular solution, so you know what you're getting. So it may say AP automation, but you look at it and it's just invoice automation. Okay, and then after you have a good handle on it, you need to decide and you need to plan. Okay, what do we want? Do we just want to automate the invoice process? We want to automate the whole thing. And you might say, well, let's just get the invoice automation under our belt, and then we can take a look. But you want to think long term, and if you think that, hey, we'll just get the invoice automation under our belt, and then maybe a year or two from now, we'll think about adding the payment piece, then you might want to rethink. And this is the reason why. Just adding the payment piece might not be as easy as I'm making it sound, because you may have bought an invoice automation solution that's standalone and has no connection whatsoever to the payment piece. So it might be the time to bite the bullet, spend a little bit more money, take a little bit more time, do a little bit more research, and see about getting the whole end-to-end solution, if you will. By the way, there's no right or wrong answer. It's not like, well, if you just get invoice automation, that's wrong. You just need to think long-term, think about the big picture, not just necessarily where we are today. Now, as you go through with this, there are bound to be a lot of staff insecurities. Just like when folks don't understand how to do something and they're reluctant to bring it up, to mention it, the same is likely to be true about fear. People are afraid or some people, not everybody, and it's unspoken, and they're basically afraid of they're going to lose their jobs. Oh, this automation solution is going to come in and it's going to take all our jobs, and we're not going to have a job. And what we've seen is that's probably not true. People will need to learn new skills, but there is still plenty of work to be done in accounts payable that you don't have to necessarily work for that. We also have other people who it's tech phobia. They are afraid of technology, and oftentimes folks who are afraid of technology, they're just afraid of it because they've never used it before. I remember when we first were getting on the internet, and they were job sites and all sorts of sites related to our jobs. You're going to all laugh at this, but I used to do talks in live talks on how to use the internet in accounts payable, how to use the internet in credit, and I'd go with a long list of websites that I wanted to show people how to use. And I would start off by saying, okay, is there anyone here who's never been on the internet? And there would be at least one person in the room would raise their hand, and I'd say, well, come on down. You're going to sit down and you're going to be the person. And then I'd let them move the mouse and all that. And they'd look like they were going to have coronary. But that, the way to get over your fear of technology is just to do it. So, we want to get people hands-on. And once they get comfortable with it, they can become your biggest missionaries for it. Okay. So adequate training, and make sure you deal with this. Don't just assume because nobody's saying anything that it doesn't exist. It's there and it's simmering right beneath the surface. You, by the way, will also know if you have this problem if you hear some of your processes telling vendors that they don't have to use the solution, or you hear back from some of your vendors or your suppliers that they were told to mail the invoice. Okay, of course, you want to have one email address for invoices. There has been a huge explosion, and we see no sign of it abating, of suppliers sending duplicate copies of the same invoice, and we're just going to have to deal with it for a while. Technology is a help in weeding out these duplicate copies of invoices, but it's a problem. And this, by the way, is a problem whether you're using an automation solution or not, getting invoices emailed to you, because suppliers to get paid. Okay, so you want to set up this one email address, and hopefully, I'm sure most of you have already done this, and make sure everybody is directed send invoices there. Okay, now you can expect as you're transitioning, and this is true, by the way, whether you're going to an automation solution, whether you're going to a new ERP system, whatever it's good, or even an ERP upgrade, that in that transition period, you want to make special arrangements to deal with duplicate invoices, because more of them are going to slip through than would slip through during normal times, and you're going to have more duplicate payments. Okay, it's just, a fact of life. Everybody's learning this new technology. No matter how much training you've given somebody, they're never going to be as good at that as they were on the process that they've been using for the last 5 years that they could do in their sleep. So expect more duplicates during this period, and then you want to make sure that you do some, checking afterwards. You want to make sure you keep up to date on your statement audits. Definitely do them, because that will help you identify the duplicates. Maybe do some additional duplicate payment checking before payments go out, because without a doubt, you can expect to see an increase in the duplicates. Okay, and this is for everybody. No matter how hard you try, vendors are already sending duplicate payments. It's just a sad fact of life. And by the way, this has nothing to do with technology. You know that one of the prime periods to find duplicates is payments that occur in December and then again in January. So a lot of duplicate payment checking will go on, or additional duplicate payment checking will go on, looking for payments made, let's say, between November and February. Okay, and here we go. The same slide. I don't know why it's in here again. I have a better picture on one. Again, you probably will not have instantaneous adoption, complete adoption, so you want to make sure you have staff allocated who can handle this for you. So as you might imagine, those who work in, manage, or have responsibility for the accounts payable function are interrupted more than almost any other group in the business community. If you would like to spend less time dealing with interruptions, you'll love our Managing Interruptions guide, which you can watch right now using the link that has appeared on your YouTube screen and is in the description. Good luck.